Richard Medhurst, as aforementioned, joins me now. Richard, my condolences to you and your family. Your country has died, has it not?
Yeah, George, it has. It's it's interesting watching them whitewash what's going on in the media. You know, they in Britain at least, and I think it's been changed in the US now, but HTS is a prescribed organization. You'll recall they arrested me for under the Terrorism Act, but I haven't seen anyone at the Telegraph or at the BBC or Sky News being arrested for glorifying HTS. So, you know, that it's funny how the Terrorism Act just randomly applies when you're serving you're whitewashing a group that serves the interests of MI6 in Israel and Turkey. But yeah, the country's died. It has died, and things are deteriorating rapidly. You know, they said initially that they'll protect journalists, that anyone who harasses journalists will be sent to prison, that you know, all minorities will have protections, that you know, soldiers will be given amnesty. But everything we've been seeing in the last 48 hours indicates the opposite. Now, we can't tell, you know, whether it's just HTS that's doing that, which is al-Qaeda, right? We should be very clear. HTS is al-Qaeda. But you have about 37 other factions that are running around the country. And, you know, even if it's the other factions, what kind of rule is this, or rule of law, when you can just walk around executing people? Because that's what's happening. We have public beatings, public executions. There are videos, for example, of ISIS trucks driving down Christian neighborhoods, firing AKs into the air. I'm hearing that they've told Christians not to, you know, put out Christmas decorations, although I haven't verified that yet, but I can definitely imagine it already having happened in certain areas in Syria now. And just yesterday, there's a Christian journalist, so you know, like me, ticks both boxes, being harassed about her religion inside of a Christian neighborhood. So yeah, the country's died, and they want to make it about Bashar al-Assad. It's not about Bashar al-Assad. It's about the secularism that Syria had. It's about its diversity, its pluralism. That is what has died, and that is definitely worth mourning.
But its territorial integrity has also died. It was already gravely wounded. Parts of Syria had been amputated and were already under the control of the new Ottoman emperor, Erdogan, of Kurdish rebel groups backed, controlled by the United States. But now the Turkish and above all the Israeli incursions into the country mean that even the map of Syria has died.
Yeah, that's correct. It's the second time too, or third time actually, because if you look at Sykes-Picot, when they chopped Syria up into smaller pieces. You were talking about Lawrence of Arabia just before the break. So, you know, shortly after the Ottomans were defeated, France and Britain carved up Syria into smaller pieces. That, you know, they created Israel. They wanted to put all the Christians in Lebanon, and you know, they gave parts of Syria to Turkey, to Iraq, and now in 2019, you know, after 2019, you had Turkey occupying Idlib in northern Syria. And that's where a lot of these terrorist groups were based, including HTS for the last couple of years. And they weren't even using Syrian currency anymore in Idlib. They were using Turkish currency for the last couple of years. So it was de facto annexed by Turkey, a NATO member. And the United States was stealing all the oil east of the Euphrates with the Kurdish SDF. And Israel was occupying the Golan Heights, but now for a third time they've taken even more land. Syria has just had its highest peak in the country, Mount Hermon, which is in the Golan Heights, captured by Israel. This is a strategic prize of enormous proportions. Not only does it have a lot of water in it, but it's a vantage point. So militarily speaking, it overlooks Israeli troop positions. It's just, you know, a prized asset for Syria's defenses. And these people who claim to represent Syria's interests, who've just taken over Damascus, didn't bother fighting the Israelis. They just let them have it without a fight, without firing a shot. So in whose interests are they acting? So it's not only they've given away land, which is even 1 centimeter of that land is precious, but also strategic land. And in addition to that, of course, the water resources, Israel's already, I think 1/3 of their drinking water is stolen from Syria regularly from the Golan, but now they probably have more of it. And the problem is that Israel has gone and hollowed out the entire military infrastructure that Syria had left. So any government that comes along now is not going to be sovereign or legitimate. It's a neutered shadow of its former self, not to mention that it's being run by a bunch of head-chopping lunatics. So Syria has no navy left. It's got no missiles left. It's got no air force left. All of it has been destroyed. Research laboratories, you name it. This is the biggest Israeli Air Force campaign in history. In history. And they've destroyed Syria's defenses. They have left it defenseless. And these people in Damascus who've taken over now let that happen.
Well, I always used to say about the Soviet Union, another country from the past, that a state for which no one will fight, a state for which no one is prepared to die, is a state which has come to the end of its usefulness. That was true of the Soviet Union. It's equally true of Syria. Nobody fought to defend it. In fact, I've seen video of Russians driving one way towards the front, and thousands upon thousands of Syrian soldiers walking in the opposite direction. Of course, there are always many reasons for the collapse of a state. But in summary, if you can, because it's a long story, what was it at the end that precipitated this really unprecedented collapse?
I really couldn't say for sure, George. There are many factors. I think the sanctions really served as one of the final nails in the coffin, right? Plural. Because they, even though the borders, or if you will, the battle lines, rather, didn't move for the last couple of years since 2019 until now, and things were relatively stable, the sanctions really, really crippled the country. And those were put in place by Donald Trump, the Caesar Act sanctions. They crippled the country. They destroyed it. I mean, but last time I was in Syria, you could exchange €1 or $1 for, 50, 60 Syrian pounds. So it's pretty good, and today it's like 13,000 or something. So you can see how they've destroyed the currency through inflation and devaluation. It's awful, and people suffered under that. And I'm assuming that made it difficult to pay wages as well. But I can't imagine. I know the video you're talking about, by the way, with the Russians cursing in the truck as they're driving past. I was trying to understand like what precipitated the fact that all of these troops are just giving up. And I'm thinking, and it's just my hunch. I don't have any proof for this, but it's my hunch that there was maybe some sort of coup. That, and I'm talking in the top brass of the military, maybe those people were bought off, maybe they themselves were exhausted, as the army was itself. I don't know what the reason was, but my hunch is maybe they were bought. They told the troops to surrender, and by the time Assad realized what was going on, it was too late, and he just fled to Moscow. This is just one scenario that I'm suggesting. I don't know if it's 100% true. I think we'll find out in good time and in due course. But it was the sanctions really did the country, and not to mention the fact that 1/4 of Syria's revenue depended on oil. 1/4 of the government's revenue. That's what subsidizes free education, free healthcare, renovation of public infrastructure. And the Americans were stealing that for the last couple of years. So you can imagine that's 1/4 of the government's revenue gone out the window. All these years, and before the Americans and the SDF, Kurdish SDF, was stealing it, ISIS was stealing it and selling it to Turkey. So for years and years, they've been hollowing out the state's resources. And these are things that people's livelihoods depended on, that the standard of living depended on. And I think it just the war really ground everybody down. Some deal was obviously made. Some deal was obviously made. Not one bullet was fired. We have to remember that they took over the country. Al-Qaeda took over the country without a fight. So that means a deal was made, and we'll find out at what point. But Erdogan is clearly behind this. I think we shouldn't. We talk about the US and we talk about Israel. We shouldn't forget the role that Turkey has played. Turkey kept al-Qaeda, they kept Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and al-Jolani nice and cozied up inside of Idlib. They financed a lot of these troops. They kept them safe. They gave them salaries. And they allowed all of these foreign fighters to come into Syria in the first place, already back in 2011, 2012 and onwards. So they opened the gates of hell onto Syria and destroyed the country.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've got to hand it to them. We are journalists, after all. Our defeat is their victory. And there's no point in denying that. The question for me is Turkey acting independently or is it acting as an adjunct of the United States? Now, the Iranian leader, in his talk today, Khamenei, he obliquely referred to Turkey as a neighboring country, which played a role, but he tried to place the main responsibility on the United States and Israel. Now, that may have been self-serving on his part, because today a very big trade deal between Turkey and Iran was announced. I don't know, but I'd be interested in your theory. To what extent is Turkey now an independent power, acting separately and independently of the United States?
Well, I know that people are aware that Turkey and the US are NATO allies and members. Turkey actually has one of the most important armies in NATO. So they have that common interest of seeing Syria destroyed, but for various reasons. The United States has for a long time wanted to control the resources there, but Turkey wants to get rid of the Kurds, right? It considers the PKK, the Kurdish Workers' Party, and its affiliate inside of Syria, the YPG, to be terrorist groups. And it basically classifies them as terrorists to persecute them. I mean, what they've done now is they've effectively encircled the Kurds inside of Syria by driving al-Qaeda down into Damascus. And then, of course, they've got them from the north. So these are the areas of Hasaka and Deir ez-Zor, everything that's east of the Euphrates. So in that regard, Turkey is acting independently, and Erdogan wants to make sure that no Kurdish state emerges. And I mean, it's just persecution, really. You know, there's no other way around it. They were cutting water to these areas many times. I covered that, how, you know, they would just cut off the water supply to everybody inside of Hasaka and Deir ez-Zor, just for the sake of making sure that Kurds wouldn't get water. So in that aspect, Turkey has a different agenda from the Americans, because the Americans work with the Kurds to take the oil, take the crops, and you know, they then drive that off into Iraq, into their bases there, and make money off of it. And you know, it's so in that regard, they've got different agendas. But Syria is the link that was the lifeline between Iran, Iraq, and Lebanon and Palestine. It's a geographical link between all of them, and a political one. Okay, I wish people would look at maps more often and read maps more often, because it makes things very clear. So, you know, Erdogan has been supplying oil to the Israelis from Azerbaijan, from Baku, and helping them with their war effort. He's helping Israel commit genocide in Palestine, despite all of his rhetoric. So Erdogan, along with the United States and along with Israel, it's in their interest to stop Syria acting as a link, a natural link between Iran, Iraq, and Lebanon, Palestine. They wanted to destroy this, you know, resistance axis for quite a while, and they've essentially conspired to do it together. But everybody wins. You know, the Americans win, Israel wins, and Turkey wins, and al-Qaeda wins. So their interests happened to all converge at the same time, and I think we'll find out in due course, you know, whether by that point, Iran and Russia, who were the main backers of Bashar al-Assad, were even in a position to do anything about it. I think by the time everything had fallen apart, I think maybe they hadn't caught on, and that's why they just got Assad over to Moscow. Because why didn't they do it last year, for example? Or why didn't he resign 10 years ago? Why only now? It's not a coincidence that this started right during the ceasefire in Lebanon. So Israel's been systematically going, from Gaza to Lebanon to Syria, and I think Iran is next on the chopping block, I'm afraid.
Well, perhaps Iraq first. Now, the Iranians predict, and we've seen this movie before, of course, when ISIS drove across the desert in their Toyotas, in their thousands, and took over Iraq's second city of Mosul. Again, a city filled with ethnic and religious minorities, and had a reign of terror there. It's where ISIS first came to the notice of the general public. Do you think